Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We are so happy to have you here tonight. We will look at deep lessons from the old wisdom of Zen masters, lessons shared in quiet temples and mountain hideaways. If you would like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I will be sharing a special group of Zen stories. Each one is like a door to understanding your mind better. Each one is made to lead you gently away from stress, too much worry, and busy thoughts. These are not just tales. They are tools, old and lasting, that can change the way you handle discomfort, confusion, and the constant wish for something different. They remind us of what the old teachers knew well, that clarity does not come from solving the puzzle of life, but from stepping outside of it. As Dogen once said, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. As you listen, you may begin to feel something change. Thoughts may become softer. The noise inside may begin to fade, and a quiet understanding may begin to rise. Let it happen. It is what you came here for. So get comfortable, let yourself fully arrive. Take one slow breath with me. And as you breathe out, open yourself to the teachings that have patiently waited, not to be understood by the brain, but to be remembered by something deeper. Let us now explore a story about the deep nature of silence and the wisdom that comes when we quiet the busy mind. In ancient Japan, a young and eager student went to his master, the famous Zen teacher Banki. The student's eyes shone with excitement for learning, his mind racing with questions and doubts that had bothered him for months. "Master," he said, bowing low, but looking very upset. "I have heard the famous riddle about the sound of one hand clapping. I have meditated on it tirelessly, looked at it from every angle, yet I still cannot find the answer. I worry I am going down the wrong path entirely." Banki looked at his student with eyes that held the depth of still water. He did not hurry to answer or show any sign of impatience. Instead, he slowly turned his gaze toward a single reed growing by the edge of a pond that looked like a mirror reflecting the afternoon sky. The reed stood tall and thin, moving just a tiny bit in the gentle breeze. "Forget the hand," Banki said softly, his voice carrying the weight of years of practice. "Go and sit by that reed. Do not leave that spot until you can hear the sound of it growing." The student felt very confused. How could a reed, which grew in complete silence, make any sound at all? How could he hear what was not there to be heard? Still, his respect for his master was deep, and he obeyed without asking more questions. For days he sat in steady meditation beside the reed, his frustration growing like storm clouds gathering in the distance. He listened with desperate focus to every sound the wind whispered through the leaves, every gentle splash of water against the shore, every buzz and hum of insects dancing in the air. Yet the reed stayed stubbornly silent, offering no secret, no magical sound to solve the mystery he looked for. His mind raced through smart arguments and complicated ideas, grabbing at explanations like a drowning man reaching for floating wood. But as the days went on, something began to change. One quiet afternoon, tired from the hard work of trying to force an answer, he simply let go. He stopped his desperate wish to hear anything at all and allowed himself to just be present with the reed, feeling the warmth of sunlight on his shoulders, the coolness of the breeze on his face. In that moment of deep stillness when all trying stopped, a deep sense of peace washed over him like gentle waves. He became one with the reed, the pond, the sky, and the very air itself. When he finally went back to Banki, his attitude had changed completely. Gone was the worried seeker, replaced by someone who carried stillness inside himself. "Master," he said with a bow that showed real respect, "I have listened." Banki smiled, seeing immediately the quality of silence that now surrounded his student. "And what did you hear?" "I heard the silence from which all sounds are born," the student replied, his voice carrying new depth. "The sound of one hand was never the real lesson. The real lesson was to stop the endless clapping of my own mind. Buddha's wisdom reminds us better than 1,000 empty words is one word that brings peace. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between the noise of looking and the silence of finding. We live in a world that has trained us to believe that answers come through more thinking, more study, more mental effort. Yet Zen shows the opposite truth. The deepest wisdom comes not from gathering thoughts, but from gently stopping them. Why do we struggle so much with inner silence? Zen Buddhism points to the restless nature of what is called monkey mind, the chatting, jumping, never settling quality of normal thinking. This mental activity feels useful because it gives us the fake feeling of progress, the sense that we are working toward understanding. But this very effort often becomes the block to the peace we want. Think about how often during your day your mind looks like that young student's frantic searching when facing a hard decision. Do you find yourself endlessly weighing choices, looking at possibilities, seeking more information? When feeling emotional pain, Does your mind immediately begin building long explanations, blaming others, or making plans to avoid it? This mental spinning, while sometimes needed for practical things, often drowns out the quiet voice of wisdom that whispers beneath the noise. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish ignore what they see, not what they think. The wise ignore what they think, not what they see." The Reed's teaching is not heard through thinking about growing. It is felt through being close to the mystery of growth itself. This points to a basic difference in Zen between thinking about something and directly experiencing it. The sound of the reed growing represents all the subtle wisdom available to us in each moment when we are not lost in the chatter of our thoughts. It might be the gut feeling of what our body needs for healing, the silent knowing of how to respond to a loved one's pain, or the creative idea that comes when we stop forcing answers. These forms of wisdom speak in ways too quiet for the noisy mind to hear. In Japanese art, there is an idea called ma, the meaningful emptiness that holds infinite possibility, the space between thoughts, the pause between words, the silence between musical notes. This is where the reed sound lives, not in the world of sounds we can hear, but in the open awareness that sees growth itself as a sacred process. Zen practice builds this quality of listening. Through meditation, we train ourselves to notice when we are caught in the endless clapping of mental chatter and gently return to simple presence. This is not about pushing down thoughts or forcing silence, but about building the ability to rest in the spaces between thoughts where deeper knowing naturally lives. Tonight, as you settle into the quiet of this moment, can you listen for the sound of your own growing? Maybe it is the gentle opening of your breath, the quiet wisdom coming up about a relationship in your life, or simply the deep mystery of being alive and aware. As the Buddha taught, silence is an empty space. Space is the home of the awakened mind. In building this inner stillness, we discover that the wisdom we seek has been speaking to us all along through the gentle voice of presence itself. Our next story takes us to a mountain temple where a deep lesson about true value is shown through an act that looks destructive but shows the deepest kindness. Daegu was a Zen master who lived with simplicity in every part of his life. His small mountain temple held only the most needed items, a few meditation cushions, basic cooking tools, and simple robes worn thin from years of use. The governor of the area, a man of wealth and deep belief in Buddhist teachings, had long admired Daegu's wisdom and often tried to show his respect through gifts of fine silks, expensive incense, and rare foods. Each gift was received with thanks but politely refused as Daegu gently explained that such fancy things would only weigh down his simple practice. One autumn day the governor arrived at the temple himself, his hands carefully holding a beautifully painted box that shined in the afternoon sunlight. His eyes shone with special happiness as he walked toward the master. "Respected Daegu," he said, bowing deeply. "I understand completely why you do not want personal luxuries, and I deeply respect your promise to live simply. But what I bring today is not for you. It is a gift for the Buddha himself. This is a beautifully carved statue of the most precious jade made by the best artists in the land. Please accept this gift for the temple's altar, so that all who come here may see the beauty of devotion made real." Daegu looked at the governor's sincere face and real desire to honor the Buddha. The man's devotion was clear, his generosity flowing from a pure heart. After a moment of quiet thinking, Daegu accepted the statue with proper manners. Together, they placed the glowing jade Buddha on the simple wooden altar, where it seemed to shine with inner light. The governor left that day filled with joy, feeling that he had given something meaningful to the sacred space that had given him so much wisdom. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it the strongest snowstorms the mountain had seen in years. The temple's small supply of firewood, carefully gathered throughout the autumn, ran out fast as the cold got worse. Soon the monks found themselves shivering through their meditation sessions, unable to cook warm meals or keep the basic comfort needed for their practice. One morning, as frost covered even the inside walls of the temple, a young monk entered the main hall to take care of the altar and found a scene that stopped him in his tracks. Daegu sat peacefully beside the fireplace, carefully placing the precious jade Buddha into the flames and building a fire around it. The statue began to give off a warm glow as the fire caught, casting dancing shadows on the master's calm face. The young monk felt his heart jump into his throat. "Master," he cried out, his voice breaking with horror and disbelief. "What are you doing? That statue is priceless. It was a gift of deep devotion. It stands for the Buddha himself." Daegu looked up from the growing warmth of the fire, his eyes twinkling with gentle humor and deep understanding. "Indeed, my young friend," he said, settling back into a comfortable sitting position as heat began to fill the cold room. "We are burning the Buddha to keep the Buddha warm. As the Buddha said, Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. This ancient wisdom shows the deep teaching hidden within Daegu's seemingly shocking act. He was showing the difference between the object and the spirit, between the symbol and reality. Why do we become so attached to the outside signs of spiritual truth? Zen Buddhism shows several layers to this very human habit. First is our natural habit to mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. We treat sacred objects, rituals, and symbols with such respect that we forget they are just tools designed to carry us toward knowing the divine directly. Second is what Buddhist psychology calls form clinging, our habit of holding on to what things look like rather than their deeper nature. The jade statue was undeniably beautiful and valuable, but its true worth lay not in its material or artistic skill, but in its ability to inspire devotion and point hearts toward waking up. When that job could be done better right now by providing warmth for actual living people doing spiritual practice, the object became something to let go of. Think about how often in your own life you might choose preserving the form of something over serving its real purpose. Do you ever find yourself more worried about keeping up the appearance of a relationship than growing its real closeness? More invested in keeping religious or spiritual traditions than living out their life, changing wisdom? More attached to the way things should look than responding to what life actually needs in this moment? Zen teacher Yunmen once said, "Every day is a good day." This wasn't simple hope, but knowing that each moment offers chances to live our deepest values regardless of outside conditions. Daegu's action showed this rule in a big way. The good day wasn't defined by having enough firewood or keeping precious objects, but by the willingness to respond with wisdom and kindness to whatever happened. The deeper teaching here shows us that true respect for the Buddha lies not in worshipping images of him, but in living out his kindness in our daily actions. The Buddha himself taught that attachment to physical things, even sacred ones, can become blocks to waking up. By burning the statue to provide warmth, Daegu was showing Buddha nature in action, the natural expression of wisdom and care that responds to immediate need without waiting. This story challenges our normal understanding of what proper spiritual behavior is. We are trained to think that keeping beautiful, expensive, or historically important objects shows proper respect. But Zen reveals a bolder view. The highest honor we can pay to any spiritual symbol is to live out the qualities it stands for. Even if that means letting go of our attachment to the symbol itself. Look deeply at your own relationship with spiritual forms, whether they be books, pictures, practices, or traditions. Can you appreciate their beauty and purpose while holding them lightly enough to let them go when wisdom calls for something different? Can you tell the difference between honoring the spirit of what they point toward and clinging to what they look like? Tonight, as you think about what truly deserves your respect and protection, remember Daegu's bold act of love. What things might you be holding on to that no longer serve their real purpose? What would it mean to burn your jade Buddhas to keep the living Buddha of your own kind heart warm and alive? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense." True spiritual growing up lies not in sticking rigidly to outside forms, but in the flexible wisdom that can honor the spirit while letting go of the appearance. Let us continue our journey with a tale that shows how we often carry heavy loads long after the need for carrying them has passed. Two monks, one older with many years of practice behind him, and one younger still learning the details of temple life, were walking together on a trip through the countryside. Their destination lay many miles ahead, and they walked in the comfortable silence that often grows between friends who share a spiritual path. The rhythm of their footsteps on the dusty road created a steady beat that matched their breathing and helped keep them mindful as they traveled. As they came to a wide river where the spring rains had created muddy banks and fast-moving water, they noticed a young woman standing unsure at the water's edge. She wore a fancy silk robe of deep blue with detailed patterns that clearly showed she was someone of wealth and importance. Her delicate silk slippers and the perfect condition of her clothing suggested she was not used to the rough conditions of country travel. She stood frozen with doubt, clearly wanting to cross, but afraid of ruining her expensive clothes in the muddy water. Without waiting or talking, the older monk walked up to the woman with a gentle bow. "May I help you across the river?" he asked simply. Before she could fully answer, he had already moved into place, and with practiced skill, lifted her onto his back. He carried her steadily across the rushing water, his feet finding safe spots despite the slippery stones beneath the surface. When they reached the other side, he set her down gently on solid ground with the same simple grace with which he had lifted her. The woman straightened her robe and gave a short nod of thanks, but no word of thanks passed her lips. Without meeting either monk's eyes, she hurried away down the path, seemingly eager to put the meeting behind her and continue with her journey. The two monks watched her disappear around a bend in the road, then started walking again in silence. But the younger monk's silence was of a totally different kind than before. Where before there had been peaceful awareness, now there was a mixing storm of shock, confusion, and growing anger. How could his respected teacher, a man who had taken sacred promises, including promises to not touch women and to not be attached to things, have touched a woman so closely? How could he have been so nice to someone who showed such clear ungratefulness? These questions burned in the younger monk's mind as he walked, creating an inner storm that grew stronger with each mile. For 2 full hours, he carried these thoughts, turning them over and looking at them from every angle, feeding his sense of confusion. The weight of his mental load grew heavier with each step until finally, unable to hold it in any longer, he burst out with barely controlled emotion. "Brother, why did you do that? You know perfectly well that we are not supposed to touch women for any reason. Our rules are clear about keeping proper distance. And that woman, she was so ungrateful. She didn't even thank you for your kindness." The older monk turned to look at his friend with eyes that held gentle humor rather than defensiveness. A calm smile spread across his wrinkled face as he replied, "My friend, I left that woman by the river 2 hours ago. Are you still carrying her?" Buddha's wisdom reminds us holding on to anger is like grabbing a hot coal with the plan of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Here we discover the deep difference between needed action and unneeded suffering, between responding to what life brings and carrying mental loads that serve no purpose. Why do we so easily pick up these invisible weights and carry them for hours, days, or even years? Buddhist psychology finds several mental habits that create this pattern. The first is our habit of overthinking. The mind's strong habit of chewing endlessly on experiences, especially those that cause strong emotional reactions. Like a dog with a bone, we gnaw at upsetting events, looking at them from every angle. But this mental activity rarely leads to peace. The second factor is our attachment to being right about our judgments. The younger monk wasn't just confused by his teacher's behavior. He was invested in his idea of what proper behavior should look like. When reality didn't match his expectations, instead of questioning his ideas, he carried the conflict inside, allowing it to ruin his experience for hours. The third element is what Zen calls sticky mind. A mind that sticks to whatever it meets instead of letting experiences come and go naturally. Like walking through a spiderweb, we collect mental trash as we move through our days, gathering anger, worries, and thoughts that have nothing to do with our present moment reality. Think about how often throughout your day you find yourself carrying people or situations long after your actual meeting with them has ended. The coworker who didn't say hello this morning. Are you still wondering about their seeming rudeness at lunchtime? The driver who cut you off in traffic. Does their bad behavior continue to bug you hours later? The friend who made a thoughtless comment last week. Do you find yourself practicing better answers you wish you had given? Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This gentle puzzle applies perfectly to our relationship with carrying mental loads. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with having emotional reactions to life events. This is part of being human. The chance for improvement lies in learning to put down these reactions when they no longer help us. The older monk's wisdom wasn't in avoiding contact with the woman or pushing down natural human kindness. His wisdom lay in his ability to act from kindness when action was needed, then let go of the whole event completely when it was finished. He didn't carry the woman physically past the river, and he didn't carry her mentally either. This points to a key difference in Zen practice between being involved and being attached. We can be fully present and helpful to whatever situation happens without becoming mentally stuck to the results or other people's reactions. The older monk helped the woman not because he expected thanks, but because helping was the natural expression of kindness in that moment. Her response, whether grateful or rude, had nothing to do with the rightness of his action. Look deeply at what you might be carrying right now that you could simply set down. What old conversations are you still practicing? What past hurts are you keeping alive through repeating thoughts? What future events are you mentally preparing for that may never happen? These mental loads are like invisible passengers we carry on our backs, weighing down our steps and blocking our ability to be present to what is actually happening now. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, can you practice the older monk's wisdom? Can you review the day and knowingly set down any people, situations, or emotions you have been carrying unnecessarily? Can you leave at the river's edge anything that no longer needs your attention? As the Buddha taught, you only lose what you cling to. The path to freedom isn't found in avoiding life's challenges, but in learning to meet them fully and then release them completely, carrying forward only the wisdom they have offered, not the weight of their memory. Now let us turn to a story about the deep difference between receiving what others offer and accepting what we choose to take into ourselves. In ancient Japan, a famously hot, tempered young samurai sought out an old Zen master who was famous throughout the area for his unbreakable peace and wisdom. The samurai had heard tales of this teacher's ability to remain calm in any situation, and his own angry nature had caused him so much suffering that he was desperate to learn the secret of such inner calm. The master agreed to teach him, but the first week brought nothing like what the samurai had expected. Instead of deep thinking talks or advanced meditation skills, he found himself assigned to simple chores around the temple. Each morning he chopped wood for the cooking fires, carried heavy buckets of water from the well, and swept the temple floors with great care. Day after day, his frustration grew as he did these humble chores. While the master seemed to pay him little attention, by the end of the week, the samurai's famous temper had reached its breaking point. He stormed into the master's simple room, where the old man sat peacefully sipping tea, apparently unaware of his student's growing anger. "This is too much," the samurai shouted, his face red with rage. "I came here to learn wisdom, not to be your personal servant. You are nothing but a fake who preys on the desperation of students." The old master continued sipping his tea with the same calm look he had worn all week, showing no reaction whatsoever to the angry words. This complete lack of response only made the samurai angrier. He began yelling worse and worse insults, calling the master a fake, a lazy old fool, and worse. Still, the teacher's face remained as peaceful as a still pond, unmarked by even the slightest ripple of bother. In a final burst of fury, the samurai grabbed a handful of gravel from the garden path and threw it directly at the master. The small stone struck the old man's robes and fell harmlessly to the floor around his meditation cushion. Not once did the master flinch or show any sign that he had even noticed the physical attack. When the samurai's rage had finally run out, the master set down his teacup and looked at him with eyes that held no trace of anger or judgment. "Tell me," he said in a voice as calm as morning mist, "if someone offers you a gift and you choose not to accept it, to whom does that gift belong?" The samurai, caught off guard by the question, and still breathing heavily from his yelling, stuttered, To the one who offered it." "I guess exactly," said the master with a gentle nod. "I do not accept your anger, your insults, or your violence. They remain entirely yours." He then pointed to a large smooth river stone that sat near the temple steps, smoothed by countless years of wind and water. "Your mind can learn to be like that stone. The strongest winds can howl around it. The heaviest rains can beat upon it. The hottest sun can bake it throughout the day. Yet the stone remains unchanged. Not because it cannot feel or know, but simply because it rests in its own true nature, unmoved by the constantly changing weather that surrounds it." The master's voice took on an even gentler quality. As he continued, "Your anger, your frustration, your need to lash out, these are simply weather patterns moving through your inner world. They are not who you are any more than a thunderstorm is the main nature of the sky. You can learn to watch these emotional storms without being swept away by them. To let them pass through your awareness without allowing them to disturb your deep peace." The samurai stood in stunned silence, feeling the heat of his rage suddenly cooled by the deep stillness that came from his teacher. For the first time in his adult life, he understood what true strength looked like. Not the ability to overpower others through force or fear, but the ability to remain strong in one's own center regardless of outside situations. He bowed deeply, finally ready to begin the real learning he had come to find. The Buddha once said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." What comes from this story is the life-changing understanding that we have complete choice over what we allow into our inner experience, regardless of what others may offer us through their words or actions. Why do we so automatically accept the emotional gifts that others push upon us? Zen Buddhism points to several deep habits that make us weak to taking on others' anger, criticism, or negativity. The first is our connection with the ego self that feels it must defend itself against any seeming attack. When someone offers us the gift of their anger, our defense systems kick in automatically, and we accept their offering by creating our own anger in response. The second factor is what Buddhist psychology calls emotional catching, our tendency to unconsciously copy the emotional states of those around us. Just as we might catch a cold from someone who sneezes near us, we often catch emotional states from people who show them near us. But unlike physical catching, emotional catching requires our participation, though this usually happens below the level of knowing awareness. Think about how often throughout your day you find yourself accepting gifts you never asked for. When a frustrated coworker snaps at you, do you automatically accept their annoyance and make it your own? When someone criticizes your work, do you take their judgment inside yourself and begin to doubt your abilities? When a family member shows disappointment in your choices, do you accept their disappointment as proof that you should feel guilty? Zen teacher Byron Katie teaches, defense is the first act of war. Every time we accept someone else's emotional offering and respond defensively, we enter into a kind of mental fight that can grow endlessly. The master in our story shows a completely different approach, the bold refusal to participate in emotional trades that serve no good purpose. This doesn't mean becoming cold, unfeeling, or disconnected from others. The stone in the story isn't shown as frozen or dead, but as naturally stable, resting in its real nature while remaining fully present to its environment. Similarly, we can build the ability to remain centered and helpful without automatically absorbing and reflecting back every emotional energy directed toward us. The deeper teaching here shows us that true strength lies not in our ability to defend ourselves against others' negativity, but in our ability to remain grounded in our own inner peace, regardless of outside trouble. This requires building what Zen calls don't know mind, the willingness to question our automatic ideas about what others' behavior means about us or requires from us. Look deeply at your own patterns of accepting unwanted gifts. What emotional offerings do you find most difficult to refuse? Criticism, anger, worry, guilt, drama. Can you begin to recognize the moment when someone holds these gifts toward you? And can you practice the bold freedom of simply not taking them? Zen Master Dogen wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Part of forgetting the self involves letting go of our strong need to take everything personally, to defend our positions, or to prove our worth through emotional reaction. When we are securely grounded in our own real nature, we can respond to others from wisdom rather than from hurt pride. Tonight, as you think about the meetings you had today, can you find any emotional gifts you accepted that you could have politely refused? Can you practice being like the stone, present, aware, and responsive, but deeply unmoved by the passing weather of others' emotional storms? As the Buddha taught, hate does not stop by hate, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. When we refuse to accept others' anger and respond instead from our own center of peace, we offer them something far more valuable than the reflection of their own trouble. We offer them the gift of seeing what peace looks like in the face of a storm. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us look at a teaching that addresses one of the hardest parts of human life, our relationship with change and things not lasting forever. A dedicated student went to his master with a question that had been troubling his heart for many months. His face carried the weight of someone struggling with deep spiritual confusion, and his words came slowly, as if each one needed careful thought. "Master," he began, bowing with deep respect, "you speak constantly of change, teaching that everything in life is always moving, that nothing stays the same from one moment to the next. I have studied this idea a lot, looked at it from every angle, and I believe I understand it in my head. Yet my heart simply cannot accept this truth. Every morning I wake to see the same mountain rising proudly outside my window, its peaks unchanged since I was a child. I drink from the same well that my grandfather dug, drawing water that tastes exactly as it did when I was young. Each night I look at the same moon that has watched over people for countless years. If everything is truly changing as you teach, why does my daily life seem to go against this basic rule?" The master listened with the patient attention of someone who had heard this question many times before, seeing in his student's words the forever human struggle between knowing something in your head and feeling it in real life. Without speaking, he signaled for the student to follow him. They walked together in thoughtful silence until they reached the banks of a river that flowed nearby the monastery, its waters catching the late afternoon sunlight like scattered diamonds. "Look carefully at this river," the master said, sitting comfortably on a large rock near the water's edge. "Tell me what you see." The student looked at the flowing water, noticing its steady movement, the way it curved around rocks, the consistent sound it made as it moved toward the distant sea. "I see a river, master. It flows steadily from the mountains toward the ocean, just as it has for countless years." "Good," the master replied. "Now, put your hand into the water and feel its coolness." The student knelt and put his hand in the flowing stream, feeling the gentle current playing around his fingers and the surprisingly cool temperature that felt different from the warmth of the afternoon air. "Now," the master continued, Remove your hand and put it into the river again. The student lifted his hand from the water, looked at it for a moment, then lowered it once more into the stream. Tell me, the master asked with eyes that sparkled with gentle humor. Is this the same river you touched the first time? The student answered immediately with the confidence of someone stating an obvious fact. Of course, it is the same river, master. It is the same body of water flowing in the same direction through the same land. The master shook his head slowly, his face becoming more serious as he prepared to show the deeper teaching. The water your hand first touched has already traveled far downstream, perhaps reaching the valley below or even beginning its journey to the sea. Entirely new water has taken its place where your hand now rests. The tiny parts surrounding your fingers are completely different from those you first touched. You are not the same person who first dipped his hand into this stream. Moments have passed. Millions of cells in your body have been replaced. Countless new thoughts and feelings have come and gone in your mind. You see the shape of the river, just as you see the shape of the mountain and the moon. But the stuff inside is never exactly the same from one moment to the next. The master's voice took on the quality of flowing water itself as he continued. You are trying to hold on to the river that has already flowed far beyond your reach. You are clinging to a mountain whose rocks are constantly wearing away bit by bit, to a moon whose face changes nightly as it grows and shrinks, to a well whose water comes from ever-changing underground springs. The shapes appear stable because the changes happen too slowly for normal eyes to see or too quickly for the mind to track. But make no mistake, everything you think of as permanent is actually a flowing process, including the very mind that watches and seeks to understand. The student sat in deep silence beside the flowing water. And for the first time in his spiritual search, he felt the truth of change not as a hard idea, but as a living reality that touched every part of his life. He watched the endless flow of the river with new eyes, seeing in it a perfect picture for the constantly changing nature of all things, including his own sense of being a fixed and separate self. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Nothing is permanent except change." This teaching shows one of the most basic lessons of Buddhist wisdoms, that our suffering often comes from our fighting against the natural flow of life. Our attempt to make permanent what is naturally moving. Why do we find change so difficult to accept even when we understand it in our heads? Zen Buddhism finds several mental habits that create this resistance. First is our built-in need for patterns and safety. Our survival as a species has depended on our ability to find reliable sources of food, shelter, and safety. This deep programming makes us naturally look for things that stay the same even in areas where such stability is ultimately impossible. Second is what Buddhist psychology calls self-clinging, our unconscious belief that there is a fixed, unchanging self at the center of our experience. This sense of being a solid, continuous person makes it difficult to truly understand that everything else might be in constant change. If I am permanent, the thinking goes, then surely the world around me must have permanent parts as well. Third is our habit to confuse word labels with actual reality. We create mental names like river, mountain, and moon, then assume these labels refer to still objects rather than moving processes. Language itself strengthens this illusion by using nouns to describe what are actually ongoing verbs. There is no river, only rivering. No mountain, only mountaining. Think about how this insight might change your relationship with areas of life where you feel resistance or suffering. Are you holding on to a relationship that has fundamentally changed, trying to make it match what it once was? Are you clinging to an identity or role that no longer fits who you are becoming? Are you resisting getting older, job changes, or changes in your physical or mental abilities? Zen Master Dogen taught, time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away. This points to a huge shift in view. Instead of seeing ourselves as fixed beings moving through changing circumstances, we can see ourselves as part of the very flow of change itself. We are not separate from the river of time. We are parts of it. The deeper teaching here shows us that accepting change isn't about giving up or being sad, but about lining ourselves up with the real nature of life. When we stop fighting the current, we can begin to dance with it. When we release our grip on how things should remain, we become available to enjoy how they actually are in each moment. Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us change is not something to be afraid of. It is the very basis of life. Without change there would be no growth, no healing, no learning, no chance for change. The same change that takes away what we love also brings new chances, fresh views, and unexpected gifts. Look deeply at your own relationship with change in this moment. What are you trying to hold on to that is already flowing away from you? What are you fighting against that might be trying to appear in your life? Can you feel yourself as part of the river, rather than someone standing on its banks trying to control its flow. Tonight, as you watch the rise and fall of your breath, the coming and going of thoughts, the small changes in how your body feels as you settle into rest, can you practice meeting change as a friend rather than an enemy? Can you let yourself flow with the constant renewal that belongs to you as a conscious being? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all mindfulness meditations, that on death is supreme. By truly accepting the changing nature of all things, including our own precious lives, we find the freedom to love fully, act bravely, and appreciate deeply whatever is present in this special moment. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the difference between fighting and flowing. This is the teaching of the old man and the waterfall. In a mountain village where a fast river cut its way through ancient rocks, an old Taoist wise man often walked along the water's edge, watching the connection between the flowing current and the solid stones that tried to change its path. The villagers knew him as a gentle, thoughtful man who seemed to understand something deep about the natural world that others missed. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered and rain began to fall, the river grew with unusual force. The current became violent and wild, rushing toward a high waterfall that dropped into a rocky canyon below. Most people avoided the area during such weather, knowing that anyone who fell into the rapids would face almost certain death against the sharp rocks at the bottom of the falls. The old man, however, had been caught by the sudden storm while walking along his usual path. As he tried to make his way back to safety, the muddy bank gave way beneath his feet. Before he could catch himself, he fell into the raging water and was immediately swept away by the powerful current. Villagers who saw his fall cried out in horror. They ran along the riverbank, helplessly watching as the old man was carried toward the waterfall by waters too violent and fast for any rescue attempt. They could only watch in sadness as he disappeared over the edge, falling into the wild water below. Everyone thought the worst. No one could survive such a fall, especially not an old man with limited strength. The villagers prepared themselves to search for his body downstream once the waters calmed enough to make such a search possible. But to their amazement, as they hurried toward the bottom of the waterfall, they saw the old man coming out from the water far below, completely unhurt. He walked calmly to the shore, water pouring from his clothes, and sat down to rest as peacefully as if he had simply taken a refreshing swim on a nice day. The villagers rushed to him, unable to believe what they had seen. "How is this possible?" they asked in wonder. "How did you survive that terrible fall? The water was so violent, the rocks so dangerous. By all reason, you should have been killed." The old man smiled at their worry and amazement. He twisted water from his sleeves and thought about their question carefully before answering. "I survived," he said simply, "because I adjusted myself to the water, not the water to me. When I felt myself falling, I did not fight against the current or try to force it to change direction. Without thinking, I allowed myself to be shaped by it. When the water wanted to go down, I went down. When it swirled, I swirled with it. Jumping into the whirlpool, I came out with the whirlpool. I became like the water itself. And this is how I survived." The villagers listened in silence, beginning to understand that they had witnessed something far more than a lucky accident. They had seen a show of a deep rule that the old man had spent years learning from his careful watching of the natural world. As the Buddha taught, nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. Here we discover the wisdom of working with life's currents, rather than exhausting ourselves in useless fighting against forces beyond our control. Why do we naturally fight against difficult situations when flow and changing might serve us better? Zen Buddhism shows that our ego mind believes it can control outside conditions through force of will. But this approach often creates more suffering than the original problem. The old man's survival wasn't mere luck. It was the result of understanding something key about the nature of life itself. When we align ourselves with the natural flow of events rather than demanding that life match our wants, we often discover tools and chances that fighting makes invisible. Think about your own relationship with hard situations. How much energy do you spend fighting against situations you cannot change? The old man's teaching suggests a different approach. Not simply giving up, but knowing how to adjust that keeps our real nature while flowing with changing conditions. This doesn't mean accepting harmful situations or abandoning our values. The old man didn't give up his desire to survive. He simply changed his plan for survival. Instead of fighting the water's power, he used it. Instead of resisting its direction, he moved with it while keeping his awareness and purpose. In relationships, jobs, and personal challenges, we often face similar choices. We can tire ourselves out trying to force results, control other people's behavior, or make outside situations match our expectations. Or we can learn to work skillfully with what is actually present, finding creative ways to reach our deeper goals through working with things rather than force. Zen master Lao Tzu taught, water is fluid, soft, and yielding, but water will wear away rock which cannot yield and is destroyed. The old man lived this teaching, showing that seeming weakness can be a source of great strength when used with wisdom. The Buddha said, "Hate does not cease by hate, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." This rule goes beyond hate to all forms of fighting back. Problems are rarely solved by fighting against them directly, but by understanding their nature and finding ways to work with the deeper forces involved. Look deeply at a current source of stress or fight in your life. Where are you trying to force the water to change direction rather than learning to swim with it? What would it mean to adjust yourself to the situation while keeping your essential values and intentions? Tonight, as you meet the unavoidable currents of daily life, unexpected changes, difficult people, situations beyond your control, can you remember the old man's wisdom? Can you find ways to keep your center while flowing with forces you cannot change? Discovering that sometimes the most direct path to your goals is the one that appears to go around blocks rather than through them. Buddha's wisdom reminds us in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Learning to flow with life's currents is ultimately about letting go of our need to control everything while keeping our ability to respond wisely to whatever happens. Like water, we can be both powerful and yielding, both steady and changing, both strong and gentle. Let us continue on our journey with a story about finding the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student went to his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an old maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing seriously for years. Yet lately, questions had been coming up that reached deeper than regular lessons. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to say what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to do well in school, to do things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest wish that had once driven his own search. After quiet silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this answer. "Why did you want their pride so much?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender knowing. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be safe and full. But the reason I wanted this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something important. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I in turn would feel I had enough reason to love and accept myself. I was asking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be proof of my worthiness even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my trying." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day I woke up to a bold possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could skip all outside approval and simply learn to love and accept myself without limits? What if I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence?" The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. "I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer situations, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as steady as my own heartbeat, separate from any outside approval?" The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never thought of. "And that realization began your search for self-knowing?" "Exactly," the master nodded. "That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with finding what was already complete inside." After quiet silence, the student asked, "And did you never again want their pride? Did that wish completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Learned habits don't vanish overnight. But something basic had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before." He pointed toward the darkening garden where fireflies had begun their dance. "I learned to see those approval, seeking thoughts as passing things, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could watch them with interest and kindness, but I no longer gave them power to decide my worth." "So you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their views," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather. Sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the deciding factor in whether I felt at peace with myself. The master's face shone with quiet joy. And never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like finding I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was shown to have been within me all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with bad thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering comes from the wrong belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through outside achievements or approval. Here we discover one of the most bold insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural right to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy not because of what we do, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, success, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and rules. These patterns become so familiar that loving ourselves without limits feels strange. Our culture makes this training stronger by promoting the myth that happiness comes from outside sources. Each message strengthens the wrong idea that we are incomplete as we are. Think about how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you change who you really are to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on outside feedback rather than inner knowing of real value? When we love ourselves without limits, we create a base of happiness that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with thanks rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without feeling destroyed because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself. And that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself deserve your love and affection." This isn't being selfish. It's recognition of basic truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and watches your experiences is not improved or hurt by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the kindness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a loved child learning, or the same kindness you'd feel for a friend in trouble. As the Buddha taught, hate is never healed by hate. By non-hate alone is hate healed. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for real change. In finding this limitless love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here beating steadily in our own hearts. Let us continue on our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism with a story about the ghosts we create with our own minds. This is the tale of the haunting that was no haunting at all. A man lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years. Their love deep and real, their friendship a source of daily joy. But as fate would have it, she became very sick. As she lay on her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her strength fading, she grabbed her husband's hand with surprising force. "My darling," she whispered, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "I cannot bear the thought of leaving you, and I cannot bear the thought of you loving another. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not see any other women. Promise me you will remain faithful to my memory forever, or I swear I will return from the grave to haunt you." The husband, his heart breaking at her words and her coming death, made the promise she demanded. What else could he do? In that moment of grief and love, he would have agreed to anything to ease her suffering and honor their bond. For several months after her death, the widower kept his word. He avoided parties, said no to invitations, and turned away from any chance of female friendship. His world became small and lonely, filled only with work and memories. But as time passed and the sharpest edge of grief began to soften, he found himself drawn back into the world of the living. It was at a local market that he met her, a kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he found himself drawn to this new person. Talking led to friendship. Friendship deepened into liking, and eventually, despite his guilt and inner fight, he fell in love again. The night he and his new love became engaged, his worst fears came true. As he lay in bed, the room suddenly grew cold, and there before him stood the clear figure of his dead wife. Her face was pale with anger, her eyes burning with blame. "You have broken your promise to me," she said, her voice carrying the chill of the grave. "You have betrayed our love and dishonored my memory." But what truly terrified the man was not just her appearance, it was her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she would return to torment him. retelling in perfect detail everything that had happened between him and his fiancée. She would repeat their conversations word for word, describe their private moments, show their most close exchanges. Nothing remained hidden from this ghostly presence. The haunting became so strong that the man could no longer sleep. Dark circles formed under his eyes. His hands shook constantly, and his new relationship began to suffer under the weight of his terror and tiredness. Desperate for relief, he sought out a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," the man said, his voice shaking as he told his story. "My dead wife's ghost appears to me every night. She knows everything I do, everything I say. She repeats our conversations exactly as they happened. I am being driven to madness." The old master listened carefully, stroking his beard thoughtfully. When the man finished his story, the master smiled knowingly. "This is indeed a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such magic wisdom. But I will tell you exactly what to do when she appears tonight." That evening, as the room grew cold and the familiar figure appeared, the man followed the master's instructions exactly. "You are truly a wise and all-knowing spirit," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you have such incredible powers and I can hide nothing from you, surely you can answer one simple question for me." "Ask your question," the ghost replied coldly. The man reached down to a large bag of beans that sat near his bedside table. He scooped up a handful and held his closed fist toward the ghost. "Tell me exactly how many beans I am holding in my hand right now." The ghost opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her form began to shake, becoming see-through around the edges. For the first time since her appearances began, she looked unsure, even confused. I cannot," she stuttered, and then like morning mist touched by sunlight, she simply vanished. The ghost never returned again, and the man was finally free to live his life in peace. Buddha's wisdom reminds us we are what we think. All that we are comes with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully our minds can create seemingly real experiences from nothing but guilt, fear, and unsolved emotions. Why do we give such power to the ghosts of our own making? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from outside forces, but from the ghosts we create through our own mental patterns. The ghost in this story was nothing more than the man's own guilt and training, projected outward and given form by his tormented mind. Think about how often in your own life you are haunted by voices that seem to know your every move, that judge your every decision, that remind you of promises you've broken or standards you've failed to meet. These inner critics often speak with the voices of people from our past, parents, teachers, former partners. But their power comes entirely from our own minds, giving them life. The man's ghost could recite his conversations perfectly, because it was his own memory playing them back to him. It knew his private moments, because it was created by his own consciousness. It appeared when his guilt was strongest, because guilt was its very substance. The ghost was real in its effects, but had no separate existence. In Zen practice, we learn to tell the difference between what is actually present and what our minds are adding to the situation. The man was genuinely in love with a new person, but his training told him this was a betrayal. His deceased wife was genuinely gone, but his unprocessed grief and guilt kept her mentally present. The master's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. By asking the ghost to know something that existed only in the present moment, something the man's own mind couldn't possibly know, he revealed the ghost's true nature. The beans in his hand were unknown even to him until he counted them. No amount of memory, guilt, or mental projection could provide this information. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true. They're not necessarily important, and they're not necessarily ours." The ghost's blame felt absolutely real to the man, but they were simply thoughts and emotions given form by his own mental processes. Look deeply at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry that speak with impossible authority about your worth, your choices, your future? Often these voices claim to know things they cannot possibly know. What others really think of you, what will happen if you take risks, whether you deserve happiness or love. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think you become. When we understand that we are constantly creating our experience through the stories we tell ourselves, we begin to see that we also have the power to question these stories, to test their truth, to challenge their power over our lives. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear coming up in your mind, can you remember the man and his handful of beans? Can you find the courage to ask these inner critics to prove their magic knowledge by answering questions they cannot possibly answer? Can you recognize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know far less than they claim? As the Buddha observed, doubt everything, Find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power the moment we stop feeding them with our belief. The moment we see them for what they truly are. Not magic visits, but creations of our own minds that can be dissolved as easily as they were formed. Now, let us explore a Zen story about why we must learn things directly for ourselves. This is the tale of Banki and the messenger. In the busy capital city, where sellers haggled in crowded markets and scholars debated in tea houses, the famous Zen master Bankai had finished another time of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the area for his deep insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Banki kept a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering teaching wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to leave for his next stop, carefully folding his few things into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman walked up to him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone used to moving in rich circles, likely a helper or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Respected master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and real interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have kept him today. Would you consider delaying your departure by one day, so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Banki, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple, where students waited for him, recognized the real need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and kindness even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply. "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple rooms, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he thought would be a meaningful meeting with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with real humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever help might be useful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Banki waited in his planned meeting room as the appointed time approached, but instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his face. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring sad news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed. Matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your teaching on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this plan would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand what is the true nature of consciousness, and how can one realize it directly. "If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to carry every word exactly as you speak it." Banki listened to this request with gentle attention, his face remaining calm and kind. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-meaning messenger, and the deep impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Banki spoke with typical simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to pass on through a messenger no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, living the very teaching he had just spoken. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting more details or other suggestions, but none came. Eventually finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and left the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This deep truth shows itself in Banki's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by someone else. Spiritual awakening cannot be passed on secondhand because it is not information but change. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were school knowledge that can be collected and carried through go-betweens? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be fully described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual asking. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it as an idea, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Think about how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected rather than truth to be lived. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of looking at our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This puzzle points to the heart of why spiritual teaching requires direct involvement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very thing that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through gathering knowledge, but through close looking at immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, keeping the illusion that we are separate watchers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or passed on because we are expressions of it. Bankai's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often says what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences happen. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grab them as ideas. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that real teaching points students toward their own direct experience rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and feelings appear, can you look at this awareness directly rather than through ideas? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with hard work. The path to freedom cannot be walked by someone else. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been, but perhaps never clearly seen. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between thinking you understand and really experiencing it. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive a room for the night, he had to engage in what was called a wisdom contest with either the head monk or a chosen person. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual smarts and understanding where deep questions and puzzling answers revealed the depth of each person's realization. At one famous monastery sitting in bamboo forests, a tired monk arrived as evening shadows began to stretch across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The head monk, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal helper to conduct the traditional wisdom meeting. This helper had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he had what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limit, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed deep insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal meeting hall, the traveling monk suggested something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, signaling with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths go beyond language altogether. The helper nodded agreement and they began their wordless exchange. The traveler raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without waiting, the helper responded by raising 2 fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the helper surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression wavered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something close to worry. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the head monk and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Respected sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The head monk raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please tell me what happened in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers indicating the Buddha and the teaching, both the teacher and the lessons he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem, the Buddha, the teaching, and the community of students." But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all three are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek teaching elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here. The head monk listened to this explanation with growing surprise, for he knew his helper's character well. As the traveling monk left into the gathering dusk, the helper himself appeared, visibly upset and breathing hard from running. "Where is that rude person?" he demanded, his single eye burning with anger. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man. I've never met such rudeness disguised as spiritual asking." "What exactly happened?" the head monk asked, genuinely curious now about what had happened between these two very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the helper explained, his voice rising with remembered insult, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual talk, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limit. Determined to remain polite despite such rudeness, I held up two fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with two eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no bad feelings for his thoughtless comment." The helper paused to catch his breath, his upset increasing as he continued. But the rascal wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up three fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the two of us, there were only three eyes total. He was on purpose emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his constant rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners. The head monk stood in stunned silence, thinking about this amazing show of how two people could participate in identical events while living in completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This deep truth shows itself in the complete misunderstanding between our two monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the eight worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These mental forces create internal weather systems that color our view of everything around us. The helper's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong way of seeing that he couldn't see any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual focus caused him to see deep wisdom in what were actually expressions of hurt feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened teaching made him interpret increasingly angry gestures as increasingly smart wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or constant hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes proof they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom lights up how our inner state creates our outer experience. Both monks were sincere in their views, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or on purpose misunderstanding. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own mental training. The story points us toward a key question. How can we build the ability to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind, keeping openness to multiple meanings rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The helper might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his view. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Banki taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to look at the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct meaning of outside events. The Buddha said, "Hate is never healed by hate in this world. By non-hate alone is hate healed." This is a law eternal. If the helper had met the traveler's seeming insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their meeting might have become a real teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our inner weather creates our outer storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Let us keep going on our journey. The following story reveals the difference between helping and holding on. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman at the river. Two monks were traveling together along a mountain path, making their way to a distant monastery where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated students who had taken strict vows as part of their spiritual training, including a vow to avoid all physical contact with women. This wasn't born from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped maintain focus on their spiritual growth. As they approached a swollen river, where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they met a young woman standing unsure at the water's edge. The current was strong and dangerous, filled with debris from the mountain rain, and she was clearly afraid to try crossing alone. "Please, honored monks," she called to them. "Could one of you help me cross this dangerous water? I'm not strong enough to make it safely on my own." One of the monks immediately tensed, his mind racing through their rules and the potential problems of this situation. Physical contact with women was explicitly forbidden, and he began making explanations for why they couldn't help, perhaps suggestions for other solutions that wouldn't require breaking their vows. The other monk, however, took one look at the woman's problem and the real danger she faced and made a different choice. Without waiting a long thought, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto his shoulders. He carried her carefully across the dangerous current, ensuring her safety with each step, and set her down gently on the far bank. "Thank you so much," she said gratefully, bowing to both monks before continuing on her way. The two monks resumed their journey, but the feeling between them had changed dramatically. The first monk walked in increasingly upset silence, his mind churning with thoughts about what he had seen. As the hours passed, his inner tension grew until finally he could no longer hold his distress. "Brother," he burst out, unable to hold his silence any longer, "I cannot understand your behavior back at the river. Our spiritual training explicitly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. Yet you picked that woman up onto your shoulders and carried her across the water. How could you so clearly break our sacred vows?" His friend looked at him with gentle surprise and responded with perfect simplicity. "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river hours ago, but you are still carrying her." Buddha's wisdom teaches us holding on to anger is like grabbing a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale shows the deep difference between kind action and mental attachment, between responding to present needs and carrying past events. Why do we often carry situations long after they've ended, replaying scenes and keeping complaints that only exist in our own minds? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our inability to release experiences once they've passed. The first monk's upset shows how rigid sticking to rules can sometimes conflict with the kind spirit that inspired those rules originally. His fellow monk saw a person in danger and responded with immediate kindness, then completely released the incident. But the first monk carried the event for hours, letting it grow heavier with each step. Consider your own habit to replay past conversations, nurse old complaints, or mentally practice scenes that have already ended. How much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that exist now only in memory? The woman crossed the river in minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through his own thoughts. This teaching applies to far more than big violations of rules. We carry harsh words someone spoke years ago, mistakes we made decades past, embarrassing moments that no one else even remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich with possibility and actual experience, goes unnoticed because we're too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In Zen practice, we learn to tell the difference between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helped when help was needed, then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on whether he'd made the right choice, worry about others' opinions, or replay the incident endlessly in his mind. Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to change everything is possible. The river crossing was changing. It began, served its purpose, and ended. Only the first monk's attachment to the event gave it ongoing existence in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax right now and rest." This teaching points directly to the freedom available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural lifespan. Look deeply at what you might be carrying unnecessarily. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that upset you, decisions you regret. All of these exist now only because you continue to pick them up and carry them. What would it feel like to set them down? The twist is deep. The monk who actually broke the rule experienced no suffering from it, while the monk who kept perfect rule following created hours of upset for himself. This reveals that suffering often comes not from our actions but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to past events, old complaints or situations that have already ended, can you remember the wise monk's example? Can you practice setting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without the burden of yesterday's experiences? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end only three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice isn't about perfect rule following, but about responding appropriately to what's actually present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever comes next. Now let us explore a story about the difference between shallow understanding and lived wisdom. This is the tale of following the stream. In the heart of a vast wilderness where tall pines reached toward endless sky, two city people found themselves completely lost. They had gone into the high woods for what was supposed to be a simple day hike, but too much confidence and poor planning had led them far from any familiar trail. For a day and a night they wandered through the thick forest, their worry growing with each passing hour. The comfortable city world they knew seemed impossibly far away. Every tree looked the same, every path led to another confusing crossing, and their sense of direction had completely abandoned them. Just as panic was beginning to set in, they stumbled upon an old hermit sitting peacefully beside a small clearing. His weathered face spoke of years spent alone, and his calm presence offered immediate comfort to the desperate travelers. "How do we find our way back to civilization?" they asked urgently, their voices carrying the desperation of people who had used up their own resources. The hermit looked at them with kind eyes that seemed to see more than their immediate problem. "I could tell you," he replied thoughtfully, "but you'd still get lost." The two men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the straightforward directions they had hoped for. "What should we do?" they asked, their frustration clear. "Go with the flow," the hermit answered simply. "I beg your pardon," one of them responded, clearly expecting something more practical and specific. The hermit smiled and pointed toward a small stream that bubbled cheerfully through the clearing. "Go with the flow. You see that stream over there? Just follow it. Streams go into creeks and creeks go into rivers and rivers go through towns. Also, along the way, you'll have water to drink and berries to eat." This practical advice made immediate sense to the lost travelers. Following water downstream was indeed a reliable way to find human towns, and the stream would provide essential resources they needed for survival during their journey. But one of the men, perhaps having heard spiritual teachings before, asked a deeper question. "Is that what Zen people mean when they say go with the flow?" The hermit paused for a moment, considering this question with the same careful attention he had given their practical need for directions. "Yes and no," he replied mysteriously, and then continued along his way, leaving the two men to find their own understanding of his words. The Buddha once said, "If you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are." This teaching points to the layered nature of wisdom that the hermit lived in his response to the lost travelers. The deeper teaching here shows us how real spiritual guidance works on multiple levels at the same time. The hermit's advice was both completely practical and deeply symbolic. On the surface level, following the stream was simply good wilderness survival strategy. On a deeper level, it represented the entire approach to living that Zen encourages. Why did the hermit say the travelers would still get lost even if he gave them directions? This points to a basic truth about the difference between receiving information and developing wisdom. Outside directions can guide us for a short time, but they don't develop our inner ability for finding our way. Real wisdom involves learning to read the natural signs and flow with the underlying currents of life itself. Consider how this applies to our spiritual seeking. We often approach teachers and teachings looking for specific directions. "Tell me exactly what to do to become enlightened. Give me the exact meditation technique that will solve my problems." But this approach, while understandable, misses the deeper point. True spiritual guidance doesn't provide a map, but teaches us how to read the land. It doesn't give us someone else's answers, but helps us develop the ability to find our own. Like the stream that naturally knows its way to the ocean, we each have an inner wisdom that can guide us if we learn to trust and follow it. The phrase, "go with the flow," has become so common that it's almost lost its meaning, often interpreted as passive giving up or lack of direction. But the hermit's yes and no response points to a more detailed understanding. True flowing isn't about drifting aimlessly, but about aligning our efforts with the natural currents of wisdom and kindness. The stream represents the Tao, the natural way that is under all life. When we align ourselves with this deeper flow, our actions become easy and effective. We stop pushing against reality and learn to work with the grain of life rather than against it. But this requires developing a different kind of smarts than our usual problem-solving mind. The travelers wanted explicit directions because that's how the logic mind works, through clear step-by-step instructions. But the deeper intelligence the hermit was pointing toward operates more like intuition, sensing the right direction moment by moment rather than following a preset plan. This is why thoughtful traditions emphasize present moment awareness. The stream doesn't need to know where the ocean is. It simply flows in the direction that feels natural right now. Similarly, when we develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, we can sense the appropriate response to each situation without needing to figure out the entire journey in advance. Tonight, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, can you sense the streams of natural wisdom flowing beneath the surface of your daily concerns? What would it mean to trust that deeper current while still attending responsibly to practical needs? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The hermit's guidance was like lighting a candle in the traveler's minds, providing not just directions, but a way of approaching life that could serve them in countless future situations. Let us continue our journey with a story about the changing power of fearlessness and unconditional kindness. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shicheri Kojin sat in his simple home, saying ancient prayers. His voice flowed smoothly through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he wrapped himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep peace in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the peace was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, waving a sharp sword that gleamed scary in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no fight. Money or your life? The thief demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to hide, to beg, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shicheri didn't even look up from his book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reading for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He pointed casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his reading as if nothing unusual had happened. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely confused. In all his years of stealing he had never met such a reaction. No fear, no begging, no anger, just simple helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but going on with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, saying sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shicheri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange meeting was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shicheri called out, his tone carrying a note of scolding. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent moments had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about manners than personal safety. "Thank you," the thief stuttered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shicheri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shicheri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding. The thief sitting in chains felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of knowing. He had met something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shicheri's patient guidance, he learned to build the same fearless kindness he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice, and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for change, he reached the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hate does not cease by hate but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What comes from this story is the changing power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we naturally believe that force must be met with force? That aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often continues the very conflicts it seeks to solve. When we respond to anger with anger, we simply increase the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with real kindness, not passive giving up, but active love, we create space for change that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately start our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through fighting back or pulling away. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict solve or get worse? Shicheri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than habit. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something deep about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's anger came from desperation and suffering, not from built-in evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shicheri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we build what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means building the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most basic instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shicheri showed all three in his meeting with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his things or even his personal safety. Think about the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless kindness Shicheri showed? Not by agreeing with them or giving in to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reaction. By staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between what happens and how you respond, where choice lives? Where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love. Buddha's wisdom reminds us better than 1,000 empty words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our promise to kindness, knowing that love has a changing power that force can never match. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant fighting between rival groups, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his friends fell around him, losing became certain. He was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield. His armor stripped, his weapons taken. That evening, they threw him into a dark, small prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the questioning designed to get information about his lord's defenses, troop movements and plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had taken what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the death. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and fast. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind made increasingly vivid pictures of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this pain. The warrior walked his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of coming doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his sadness, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master was sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so real, so certain? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to go deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough, but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window. A sound that spoke of the natural world continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a deep peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more trapping than the stone walls around him. The prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom lights up the deep truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless stories about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds grew as survival tools, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this ability serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental pictures for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your worry comes from vivid imaginings of future scenes that may never happen? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist mostly in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to change, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen. But change teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic talks would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone. The future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we build what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than preset worry. When we truly live in the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention changed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering turned into peace. This change is available to us in every moment of worry or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of who we are and the mystery of consciousness itself. This is the tale of Chuang-Tzu and the butterfly. The ancient Taoist sage Chuang-Tzu lived simply, spending his days in quiet thinking of the natural world and the deeper mysteries of life. He was known for his profound insights into the nature of reality and his ability to see beyond the surface appearances that convince most people they understand the world around them. One afternoon, after a morning of walking through bamboo groves and observing the play of light on water, Chuang-Tzu lay down beneath a flowering tree to rest. The gentle warmth of the sun, the soft sound of wind through leaves, and the smell of spring blossoms created the perfect conditions for deep relaxation. As he settled into this peaceful state, his mind slowly shifted from ordinary waking awareness into the mysterious world of dreams. In his dream, something amazing happened. Chuang-Tzu found himself turned into a beautiful butterfly, his human form completely forgotten. He fluttered gracefully from flower to flower, his delicate wings catching the sunlight as he moved through a world of pure color and sensation. There was no memory of being a thinker, no awareness of human concerns or book learning. He was simply and completely a butterfly, experiencing the world through bug eyes, moving by instinct, living entirely in the present moment of flight and discovery. The butterfly that was Chuang-Tzu felt utterly free, unburdened by the heavy thoughts and complex worries that typically occupy human minds. There was only the joy of movement, the sweetness of nectar, the warm touch of sun on delicate wings. This wasn't a dream about being a butterfly while knowing he was really a man. It was the complete experience of butterfly life with no trace of human identity remaining. Then, as suddenly as the change had happened, Chuang-Tzu woke up. He found himself lying beneath the tree, the afternoon sun having moved across the sky during his sleep. His human body felt solid and familiar, his thinker's mind immediately active with questions and observations. The vivid dream began to fade as waking consciousness came back. But instead of simply dismissing the experience as an unusual dream, Chuang-Tzu found himself puzzled by a deep question that challenged everything he thought he knew about who he was in reality. He sat up slowly, still feeling the lingering sensation of flight, and thought about the meaning of what had just occurred. Was I just now a man dreaming I was a butterfly? He wondered aloud. Or am I perhaps a butterfly now dreaming that I am a man? The question wasn't merely playful guessing. It pointed to something basic about the nature of mind and identity that most people never consider. If the experience of being a butterfly had felt completely real and true while it was happening, how could he be certain that his current experience of being human was any more real or permanent? Buddha's wisdom teaches us all existing things are changing. Work out your salvation with hard work. This ancient teaching lights up the fluid nature of identity and the importance of not clinging too tightly to any particular sense of self. Why do we assume that our current state of mind represents the ultimate reality? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to take our present experience as fixed and absolute, when in fact all states of mind, waking, dreaming, sleeping, are temporary and constantly changing things arising in the vast space of awareness. Chuang-Tzu's question challenges our basic ideas about who and what we are. During the dream, the butterfly identity felt completely true and real. Upon waking, the human identity seems equally true and real. But which one represents his true nature? Or is perhaps the question itself based on a false idea? Consider your own experience of identity throughout different states of mind. Are you the same you when you're dreaming as when you're awake? What about when you're deeply absorbed in an activity or in deep meditation or in moments of creative flow when self-consciousness disappears entirely? Which of these states represents your real identity? In Zen practice, we explore the possibility that all these different identities are simply temporary appearances in mind, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. The waves are real, but they're not separate from the ocean. The clouds are real, but they're not separate from the sky. Similarly, all our various identities and experiences are real, but they're not separate from the underlying awareness in which they appear. The butterfly dream reveals something deep about the nature of change and possibility. If Chuang-Tzu could completely become a butterfly in his dream mind, what does that suggest about the fixed boundaries we imagine exist around who we are? How solid are the limits we place on ourselves based on our current circumstances or self-concept? Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Chuang-Tzu's experience points to this same teaching. The more deeply we investigate the nature of selfhood, the more we discover that our fixed ideas about identity begin to dissolve. The Buddha said, shape is emptiness. Emptiness is shape. The man and the butterfly are both real and both empty of permanent separate existence. They are temporary formations in the field of mind, each true while present, each naturally dissolving to make way for whatever comes next. Look deeply at your own sense of who you are. How much of who you think you are is based on roles, memories, and ideas that are actually quite fluid and changeable? What would remain if you let go of your attachment to being any particular type of person? Tonight, as you move between waking mind and the dream state, can you remember Chuang-Tzu's deep question? Can you hold your identity lightly, recognizing that whether you're experiencing yourself as human or butterfly, worker or dreamer, The awareness in which all these experiences arise remains constant and free. As the Buddha observed, everything is changing. Keep going with awareness. The man dreams of being a butterfly. The butterfly dreams of being a man. But the dreaming itself, the pure ability for experience, remains as vast and free as the sky, untouched by whatever temporary forms dance within it. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the intensity required for real spiritual awakening. This is the tale of the drowning lesson. Beside a crystal, clear mountain river where water flowed over smooth stones with the endless song of moving current, a hermit had set up his practice. For years he had lived alone, finding in the rhythm of flowing water and changing seasons a perfect mirror for the movements of his own mind. One morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the leaves and the air carried the fresh scent of mountain laurel, a young man approached the hermit's simple home. The seeker had traveled far, his clothing dusty from the journey, his face earnest with spiritual longing. "Master," the young man said, bowing respectfully, "I wish to become your student." The hermit looked up from his thinking, studying the newcomer with eyes that had grown used to reading the subtle signs of real versus shallow spiritual interest. "Why?" the hermit replied simply. The young man paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because I want to find God," he said finally, believing this to be the most noble response. What happened next took the seeker completely by surprise. Without warning, the hermit sprang to his feet, grabbed the young man by the back of his neck, and dragged him toward the river. Before the stunned visitor could protest, he found himself being pushed into the clear, cold water. The hermit's strong hands forced the young man's head beneath the surface and held him there. Panic set in immediately. The seeker's lungs began to burn as his oxygen ran out. He kicked and struggled with increasing desperation, his arms flailing as he fought to break free. Every second felt like a lifetime as his body screamed for air. Nothing existed except the urgent, overwhelming need to breathe. After what seemed like a lifetime, but was probably only a minute, the hermit finally pulled the gasping young man up out of the water. The seeker coughed violently, water streaming from his nose and mouth as he struggled to fill his lungs with precious air. His entire body shook from cold shock and the aftermath of near drowning. When his breathing finally normalized, the hermit spoke again, his voice carrying a different quality, still gentle, but charged with unmistakable intensity. "Tell me," he said, watching the young man's face carefully, "what did you want most of all when you were underwater?" The answer came without hesitation, raw and honest: "Air." The hermit nodded slowly, satisfied that his lesson had found its mark. "Very well," he said. "Go home and come back to me when you want God as much as you just wanted air." Without another word, the hermit turned and walked back to his place of meditation, leaving the dripping, shaken young man to think about the deep teaching he had just received. Buddha's wisdom reminds us thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Yet this wisdom must be lit by real spiritual fire, not merely book interest. The hermit's dramatic teaching lights up the difference between casual spiritual curiosity and the total commitment that real awakening requires. What comes from this story is recognition that spiritual seeking demands the same strength and urgency we naturally bring to physical survival. The young seeker thought he wanted God, but his desire was still within the realm of like to have, rather than need to have. He wanted spiritual awakening as an addition to life rather than as life itself. Why do we approach spiritual development with weak commitment? First is our attachment to comfort and the familiar. Genuine change requires letting go of who we think we are, which the ego experiences as death. Second is our misunderstanding of what spiritual seeking entails. Popular culture presents awakening as a pleasant growth, but traditional teachings describe it as a taking apart of illusion. Third is our tendency to keep spirituality separate as one area among others rather than a complete turning of our relationship to life. Consider how this plays out in modern seeking. We collect techniques like trophies, jumping from meditation retreats to healing workshops to learning meetings, gathering experiences without allowing any single practice to fundamentally change us. We want the safety plan of spiritual development without paying the cost of total dedication. The drowning experience represents what mystics call the dark night of the soul. Moments when our usual sources of identity and safety are stripped away. In such moments, we discover what we truly value most deeply. This is the quality of desire that spiritual awakening requires. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Practice is not about achieving some special state. Practice is about being willing to die to who you think you are." The hermit's lesson brought the young seeker face to face with this death, like quality of real spiritual work. This intensity doesn't mean spiritual practice should be grim. Rather, it means bringing the same passionate engagement to inner development that we naturally bring to whatever we value most deeply. A musician practicing for a big concert, a scientist pursuing a discovery, all demonstrate the focused dedication that spiritual awakening requires. The river represents the flow of ordinary mind, where we spend most of our time skimming along the surface. Being pushed underwater symbolizes the necessity of going deeper into the unconscious patterns that actually rule our lives. This depth work requires the same survival-level intensity the seeker experienced when deprived of air. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual hopes, can you honestly check the quality of your desire? Is your seeking driven by curiosity and preference or by necessity? What would it mean to want truth as much as you want your next breath? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The path to awakening lies not in gathering more spiritual experiences, but in bringing the wholeness of our being to whatever practice we choose. Now, let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The land favored his opponents, and by every normal measure of war strategy, the coming battle should result in crushing defeat. Yet something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps it was desperate hope. But he felt certain that his cause was just. And his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force against them. Fear spread through their ranks like a sickness. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with gloom spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their spirit was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated. Regardless of any other factors, skill, better weapons, even number advantage, means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that belief. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the years to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and took out a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the gathered group. "We have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself show our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with waiting. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment. This one flip of metal spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its path as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer burst from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and hugged each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was promised. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and combined power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, beating forces much larger than their own and securing a win that would be remembered for years. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his helper approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the helper said, "what an incredible thing. The coin showed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decided." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and took out the coin, holding it so his helper could look at it closely. "No one can change destiny." The helper looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think we become." Here we discover the deep truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence when our own minds play such a key role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all outside circumstances, we have tremendous power over the inner conditions that decide how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something deep about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their number disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome bigger numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply trick his troops through lying. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that results are set, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive results through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the mental conditions that allowed their best qualities to show. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both purpose and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific results, we can deeply influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure regardless of outside circumstances. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their number disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on blocks rather than possibilities, letting fear decide your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin, a practice or view that consistently points you toward positive engagement regardless of circumstances? The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of mind itself. When we approach situations with real confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover abilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the results you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create inner conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have deep influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of being happy with what you have. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hills, a tired traveler met a shepherd tending his sheep. The morning sun climbed steadily higher and clouds gathered in the distance, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or hot sun. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth rock, watching his sheep eat happily among wild grasses. His face bore the calm look of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his manner, a quality of unshakable peace that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with real warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like confusing reasoning, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he pointed toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get. So, I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the deep simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding like seeds finding good ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the worry of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What comes from this story is the recognition that true happiness comes not from controlling outside circumstances, but from changing our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we tire ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance. Not passive giving up, but the deep wisdom that recognizes fighting against reality as the main source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an inner war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for happiness. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day fighting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small tightness in our mind, a tiny rebellion against reality that adds up into constant dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or stopping to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when results differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to decide our happiness. Zen Master Senkan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest getting rid of all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of fighting back. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be happy when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on outside circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his sheep and appreciates comfort, but his basic happiness doesn't depend on any particular result. Tonight, as you think on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own mind? What if happiness isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in view? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life match our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a quiet mountain lake, a young student sat sad on the temple steps as the sun began its fall toward the water. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months, he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the deep teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher looked out at the lake where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. "I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world." "You can," the teacher said simply. "How?" asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. "I couldn't even memorize the basic prayers. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters." The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. "Live from your heart. I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it?" "Yes," the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. "Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the tip of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its front?" The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. "Sort of squint," said the teacher patiently. "That boat is you as you leave the monastery. The lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple, which triggers another. By constantly trying to live as wise and loving a life as you can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works creates other good works. Most important, Notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven. The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey, the wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. "Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father?" asked the boy, hope beginning to grow in his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through big gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple truth of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal awards or recognized achievements qualify us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to outside approval and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually passes from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a stage, a title, or a certificate, when in reality the most deep lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the honesty of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you meet people who touch your life not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with real care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their knowing. In Zen practice, we build what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural passing that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads unavoidably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of real living becomes a teaching. Each act of kindness creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reaction sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you see the golden wake you're already creating? Perhaps it's in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be lighting up paths you've never imagined. Tonight, as we come to the end of our time together, can you feel how the calm you've found isn't something far away that you need to search for, but something that's been inside you all along? Can you sense that the peace you've touched through these stories was always there, just waiting for you to notice it? The Buddha taught us, if you are facing in the right direction, all you need to do is keep walking. As you sit with this wisdom, remember that feeling peaceful and clear doesn't require perfect circumstances or special moments, but grows naturally from your own ability to be present, available whenever you choose to look inward. Each story we've shared tonight has shown a different side of the same simple truth, that our problems get smaller when we learn to hold life more gently. That real freedom comes when we stop fighting reality, and that lasting happiness comes from seeing through the thoughts that create unnecessary stress. Even when your mind wanders, even when old worries or restless feelings try to creep back in, the understanding you've gained tonight has settled deep inside you, ready to help and steady you whenever you need it most. Notice as you rest here now that these old teachings haven't pointed you towards some distant place, but toward a way of living with more ease and awareness, right where you are in the quiet that surrounds you. Feel how your breathing has naturally slowed down, how your thoughts have settled, and how your whole body has relaxed into this peaceful state. As you move from this peaceful space back into your daily life, carry with you not just these stories, but the deep calm and insight they've stirred up in you. May this inner quiet stay with you, guiding you through whatever tomorrow brings. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Sleep